The city light shimmered on the wet pavement as a faint drizzle painted the streets in silver. A young girl, barely 16, stood beneath the flickering glow of a broken street lamp, her thin hands trembling as she held her brother close. His breathing was shallow, erratic, like a candle struggling against the wind. Around her, people passed by in suits and umbrellas, their eyes glued to glowing phones, their steps quick, their hearts closed. "Please, somebody help," her voice cracked, echoing into the night, raw, desperate. The boy's lips were turning blue now. Cars sped past. No one stopped. Until a black limousine rolled to a halt at the curb. From it stepped a man in his 40s. Sharp suit, polished shoes, eyes that had seen too much money and too little mercy. The billionaire, Michael Grant, frowned slightly at the scene, as though inconvenience itself had called his name. The girl's knees buckled as she pleaded. "Please, sir, my brother, he can't breathe." Her voice was rain mixed with panic. For a heartbeat, Michael just stared. The streetlight blinked, and in that fragile flash, something old and buried stirred behind his calm expression, something he hadn't felt in years. "Before we dive deeper, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? It amazes me how far a single story can travel. Drop your city. Let's see how wide kindness still spreads." Michael knelt, slowly, his expensive trousers grazing the muddy ground. What happened to him? His tone was clipped but not cruel. The girl tried to speak, but tears stole her words. He was fine, and then he just couldn't. She pressed her palm against her brother's chest, counting seconds that felt like eternity. Michael looked around. "Someone call an ambulance," he barked, his voice slicing through the crowd. Heads turned, but no one moved. Not one. He swore under his breath and pulled out his phone. "Yes, emergency services. I need a paramedic at 5th and Main. Now." He glanced at the girl. "Keep his airway clear." She nodded, her hair clinging to her wet cheeks. "Thank you, sir. Please don't let him die." For a moment, something shifted in Michael. The pleading eyes, the way she clung to hope, it all felt too familiar. He swallowed hard. The rain thickened, masking his face as he watched the boy struggle. He removed his coat and wrapped it around the shivering child, ignoring the mud staining its fabric. "What's his name?" "Eli," she whispered. "My name's Grace." "Grace," he repeated softly, as though the name itself hurt to say. "He'll be all right." But even he didn't know if that was true. The ambulance siren screamed in the distance, slicing through the heavy night. Grace clutched her brother tighter, tears mixing with rain. "Here's all I have." Michael looked at her, the desperation, the innocence, the fight. It reminded him of another rainy night years ago, when he too had watched someone he loved slip away while strangers looked on. His jaw tightened. Not again. Not tonight. The sirens grew louder. He stood, scanning the street like a commander preparing for battle. He waved his arm as flashing lights turned the corner. "Over here!" he shouted. The medics rushed in, lifting Eli onto a stretcher. Grace stumbled beside them, whispering prayers under her breath. Michael followed without thinking, his driver trailing behind. "We're going to Mercy General," one of the medics called. "I'm coming with you," Michael said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Inside the ambulance, Grace sat trembling. Michael took the corner seat, watching as the oxygen mask covered Eli's small face. "Hold on, kid," he murmured. "Don't give up." Grace turned to him, eyes wide with gratitude and fear. "Why are you helping us?" He hesitated. "Because someone didn't help me when I needed it most." The ambulance roared through the storm, its lights painting the city red and blue. Michael stared out the window, lost in thought he'd buried under fortune and fame. And somewhere between those flashing colors, he wondered if the night was more than coincidence, if maybe, just maybe, life was giving him a second chance to be human again. The ambulance screeched to a stop under the pale hospital lights. The doors flung open, and the paramedics rushed Eli through the sliding glass doors of Mercy General. Grace stumbled after them, soaked to the bone, clutching Michael's coat tightly around his shoulders as though it were armor. Inside, the world became a blur of white walls, harsh fluorescent lights, and hurried footsteps. Nurses shouted codes. The smell of disinfectant stung her nose, and machines beeped in uneven rhythms. Grace stood frozen, helpless, watching as a brother disappeared behind double doors that read emergency, authorized personnel only. Michael stood beside her, his hand halfway raised as if to offer comfort. But he hesitated. Comfort wasn't something he'd practiced in a long time. Grace turned to him, eyes red and wet. They'll help him, right? Michael nodded once, firmly. They will. His voice carried authority, the kind that made people believe him, even when he wasn't sure himself. Minutes dragged like hours. Grace sat in a corner of the waiting area, arms wrapped around her knees. Michael paced. His phone buzzed. Business partners, assistants, meetings he was now missing. He silenced them all. For once, none of it mattered. Finally, a nurse approached. "The boy's in critical condition," she said gently. "We need to run more tests, but he'll need intensive care." Grace's breath hitched. "I can't afford." "I'll take care of it," Michael cut in, his tone leaving no space for protest. Grace looked up, her lips trembling. "Why?" He met her gaze for the first time fully. Because no child should lose their chance to breathe just because the world measures worth in dollars. If you were there in that moment, what would you have done? Be honest. Comment your answer below. And if words fail you, just hit like to prove that compassion still matters. Grace's tears spilled freely now. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're like an angel." Michael gave a faint, humorless smile. "No, just a man trying to fix something he can't anymore." Hours passed. Grace eventually drifted into uneasy sleep on a plastic chair. Michael remained standing, his gaze fixed on the closed door to Eli's room. The rhythmic beeping of monitors became a strange kind of prayer. In those silent moments, he saw flashes. A hospital room years ago, a girl with golden hair lying pale against white sheets. Her name had been Clara. His sister. He had been younger then, reckless and proud, too late to say goodbye. The world had taught him to make money, not memories. He blinked hard, shaking the image away. When the doctor emerged at dawn, Michael straightened. "Your boy's stable for now," the doctor said, glancing at Grace, who stirred awake. "But he'll need ongoing treatment, respiratory therapy, medication. It won't be cheap." Grace clutched her brother's coat tighter. "I don't have anyone. My parents, they're gone." The doctor hesitated, his eyes darting toward Michael, recognizing him. "Mr. Grant?" "Add it to my account," Michael said quickly. "Everything." The doctor nodded, relief softening his features. When he left, Grace whispered, "You don't even know us. You don't have to." "I do," Michael interrupted softly, "because once no one did it for me." She looked at him as if trying to read the story behind his eyes. "Was it someone you lost?" He exhaled slowly, the weight of years pressing down. "My sister. She died while I was closing a deal. I thought I had time." His voice cracked on that last word, fragile and human. Grace didn't know what to say. Instead, she reached out, her small hand resting over his. "Then maybe helping Eli is your second chance." Her words hung between them, pure, uncalculated, and true. For the first time in years, Michael felt something break open inside his chest, the hardened armor of guilt and solitude giving way to something warmer, gentler. He stood and looked through the window at Eli, sleeping peacefully under the glow of monitors. "He's a fighter," Michael murmured. Grace smiled faintly. "He's all I've got." Michael paused. "Then let's make sure he never has to fight alone again." The morning light seeped through the hospital blinds, painting soft gold over their faces. For Grace, it was hope. For Michael, it was redemption, the kind that didn't come from wealth but from finally choosing to care. He turned toward the corridor. "I'll have my assistant arrange a private room for him," he said. Grace blinked, speechless. "You've already done so much." Michael stopped her with a gentle gesture. Sometimes doing too much is exactly what's needed to balance what we failed to do before. Grace's eyes shimmered again, but this time not from sorrow. "You don't even know what this means to me." He smiled faintly, gazing toward the hallway that led to Eli's room. "Maybe I do, Grace. Maybe I do." Outside, the storm had quieted. The city, washed clean, reflected the first light of morning, soft, forgiving, and new. The following days blurred into one long stretch of hospital corridors and sleepless nights. Michael kept visiting, not out of obligation, but something quieter, deeper. He brought breakfast for Grace, coffee for the nurses, and silence for himself. Every time he walked in, the staff whispered his name in disbelief, the billionaire who traded boardrooms for waiting rooms. Grace began to notice the small things, how he stood by Eli's bed when no one was looking, how he smoothed the boy's blanket, how his eyes softened when the monitors beeped. He wasn't just helping out of guilt anymore, he was staying out of care. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the blinds, Eli opened his eyes. Weak, pale, but alive. Grace gasped, gripping his hand. Eli, you're awake. The boy blinked, his lips twitching into a faint smile. Did we make it? Grace laughed through tears. You did, silly. Michael stepped closer, smiling for the first time. A real smile, not the kind he used for interviews. Welcome back, champ. Eli's gaze drifted between them. Are you her dad? Grace chuckled softly. No, Eli. He's the man who helped us. Michael knelt by the bedside. I'm just someone who believes your sister's voice could wake the whole world. Have you ever had someone help you when no one else would? Right, yes, and tell me their name. Maybe gratitude can travel further than we think. Eli's small hand reached toward Michael's, trembling slightly. Thank you, so. Michael squeezed back gently. You don't need to thank me. Just get better. Over the next week, the rhythm of their lives began to shift. Grace started reading to her brother every evening. Simple children's stories about bravery and hope. Michael often sat nearby, pretending to work on his phone but really listening. Sometimes he'd glance at Grace, her tired eyes, her worn-out shoes, the quiet strength she carried, and wonder how someone with nothing could still shine so fiercely. One evening, Grace looked up from the storybook. You know, Mr. Grant, I searched your name. Michael arched an eyebrow. And what did Google say about me? That you're one of the richest men in the country, she said softly. But it didn't say anything about this side of you. He leaned back, sighing. That's because this side of me doesn't make headlines. Grace smiled faintly. Maybe it should. Their laughter filled the sterile air, soft and human. Even Eli joined in weakly, his laughter raspy but alive. Later that night, as Grace went to get water, a nurse approached Michael. You've been here every day, she said gently. Most people in your position send donations. You're different. Michael stared at the floor. Maybe I'm just trying to remember what being human feels like. She nodded. Well, you're doing it right. When Grace returned, she found him staring out the window, lost in thought. What are you thinking about? She asked. He hesitated. About how many lives I've walked past because I thought money was the only language that mattered. She sat beside him. It's never too late to learn a new one. Her words hit him harder than she knew. For the first time in years, he felt small, not in weakness, but in awe how much more there was to life than luxury. Days later, Eli's condition improved enough for him to be discharged. Grace was overwhelmed. I don't even know how to thank you, she said, her voice trembling. You've done everything. Michael smiled gently. Then promise me something. Anything. Finish school. Take care of him. And when you can, help someone else like I helped you. Grace nodded through tears. I will. I swear I will. He placed an envelope in her hand, a folded check, for rent, food, school supplies. It's not charity, it's a restart. She hesitated. I can't take this. You're not taking it, he said softly. You're owning it by surviving. She looked at him for a long moment before slowly accepting it. Thank you, Mr. Grant, for everything. Call me Michael. Okay, Michael. Outside, the air smelled of rain again, but this time it carried promise instead of pain. Grace and Eli walked ahead toward the bus stop. Michael stood near his car, watching them go. For once, he didn't feel like a savior. He felt like a man who'd finally stopped running from himself. As the weeks passed, Grace and Eli began to rebuild the fragile pieces of their small life. They moved back into their tiny apartment. Cracked walls, flickering bulbs, but filled with a scent of warmth again. Michael visited often, though he never stayed long. He'd drop off groceries, check on Eli's recovery, and always leave before anyone could say thank you. Grace began working part-time at a diner near the hospital, balancing school and home. Her heart lighter now, but still weighed by uncertainty. Every night, she'd whisper prayers, not for money, not even for luck, but for strength. One rainy evening, Michael showed up again. He leaned against the doorway of the diner, wearing that same calm expression, though his eyes told a quieter story. Grace spotted him through the glass and hurried out. "You came," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "I was nearby," he replied, smiling faintly. "And I was hungry." She laughed softly. "Then you came to the right place." He ordered the simplest thing on the menu, soup and bread, and sat by the window. Grace served him herself, though her hands trembled slightly. As he ate, he watched her move from table to table, patient and kind to everyone, even the rude ones. There was a grace to her, the kind you couldn't buy or fake. When her shift ended, they sat outside under the awning, rain pattering above them. "You didn't have to come all this way," she said softly. "I wanted to see how you were doing." "We're managing," she smiled. "Eli's getting stronger every day. He wants to be a doctor now." Michael chuckled. "That sounds expensive." "Everything we're dreaming about is," she said, glancing at him with a knowing smile. "Now it's your turn. Share one small good thing you did recently. Write it below so others remember that humanity still lives. Your story might light someone's path tonight." Michael tilted his head, amused. "You always find a way to make everything sound simple." "Maybe because it is," she replied. "People just forget." He looked down at his watch, not because he was in a hurry, but because he didn't know what to say next. "Grace," he began slowly, "what if I told you there's a way to make sure Eli never has to worry about his future?" She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I have a scholarship foundation. It funds education for kids who faced impossible odds. I'd like to put Eli on that list." Grace's eyes widened, her voice trembling. "You do that for him?" "I'd do it for both of you," he said softly. "He deserves a chance. And you deserve to breathe again." For a long moment, she just stared at him, tears threatening to fall. "You have no idea what this means." He smiled faintly. "I think I do." They sat in silence as the rain softened. Michael looked out into the street, watching headlights smear across puddles. "You know," he said, "I used to believe kindness was weakness, that caring too much made you lose your edge. But now," he paused, looking at her, "now I think it's the only thing that makes us human." Grace nodded, her eyes glistening. "It's strange, isn't it? You can have everything and still feel empty until someone reminds you what it's like to be needed." He met her gaze. "You reminded me." The streetlight flickered, bathing them in soft gold. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain and freshly baked bread. When Michael finally stood to leave, Grace stopped him. "Wait," she said. "Before you go, thank you, not just for the money or the help, but for seeing us, really seeing us." He smiled. "Thank you for letting me." She hesitated. "Will we see you again?" His eyes softened. "If you'll have me." Grace laughed quietly. "Then I guess you'd better come hungry next time." He chuckled. "Deal." As he walked away, she watched him disappear into the night. The billionaire who had everything, yet somehow seemed like the loneliest man in the world. Inside his car, Michael sat for a long moment before starting the engine. Her words echoed in his mind, "for seeing us." He had spent a lifetime being seen for his wealth, his power, his name. But for the first time, someone had seen the man beneath all that. And it scared him, because he realized how much he needed it. He drove off slowly, rain streaking the windshield, unaware that this connection, fragile as it was, would soon be tested in ways neither of them could imagine. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of their lives began to weave into something quiet but beautiful. Grace returned to school, Eli started smiling again, and Michael, despite his busy empire of meetings, interviews, and deadlines, found himself drawn back to that small diner more often than he admitted to anyone. He'd stopped by Afterwake, trading boardroom tension for the sound of clinking cups and Grace's laughter. She'd always tease him for ordering the same thing: tomato soup, a grilled sandwich, and coffee too bitter for his own good. He didn't know why he came. Maybe because every time he saw her, the noise inside him went silent. But one evening, things changed. Grace wasn't at the diner. Instead, her manager told him she'd taken Eli back to the hospital. Something about a relapse. Michael's heart sank. He didn't wait another second. He turned and left, his footsteps echoing in the rain-soaked street. When he arrived at Mercy General, the air smelled the same, sterile and sharp, like fear. He found Grace pacing in the waiting area, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. "Grace," he called softly. She turned, startled, and for a split second, relief flashed across her face before guilt replaced it. "You shouldn't have come." "I had to," he said. "What happened?" She wiped her face. He was fine this morning. Then he started struggling to breathe again. The doctors said his lungs are weaker than they thought. Michael placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "He'll pull through. He did before." Her voice cracked. "What if he doesn't this time?" "If he doesn't," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "then he'll still know he wasn't alone." Her eyes shimmered. "Why do you care so much, Michael?" He exhaled, his chest tightening. "Because once, someone should have cared about me, and no one did. I can't watch that happen again." Grace broke down, burying her face in her hands. Michael stepped forward, wrapping his arms around her as she trembled. For a long time, neither spoke. The only sound was a steady beep of monitors beyond the wall and the hum of the hospital's fluorescent lights. If that moment hit you hard, leave a red heart hash. Sometimes one little symbol says what our hearts can't. Hours passed before the doctor emerged. "He's stable for now," he said gently, "but we'll need to keep him under observation. It might take time." Grace nodded weakly. "Thank you." Michael exhaled deeply, tension easing just slightly. He turned to Grace. "You should rest." "I can't," she whispered. "Not until I know he's safe." "Then at least eat something," he insisted. "You're shaking." Grace looked at him, this man in an expensive coat and weary eyes, and for the first time, she noticed the exhaustion in him too. The kind that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from years of holding everything in. "Will you sit with me?" she asked softly. He nodded. They sat side by side in the silent corridor, two people from different worlds connected by the same fragile thread, love and fear. After a while, Grace spoke again. "You know, I used to think people like you never cared about people like us." Michael tilted his head. "And now?" She smiled faintly. "Now I think I was wrong." He looked at her for a long moment. "You weren't wrong, Grace. Most don't. But maybe that's a problem with power. It convinces us that empathy is optional." She leaned back against the cold wall. "Maybe we can teach them better." He smiled. "Maybe you already are." Silence settled between them again, soft and heavy, filled with unspoken gratitude. A few days later, Eli improved once more. Grace wept openly when the doctor said he could go home soon. She turned to Michael, laughing through tears. "He did it again." Michael grinned. "Told you. The kid's a warrior." But behind that smile, there was something else, a flicker of fear, a memory of his sister's final relapse that hadn't ended like this. He pushed it away. This time would be different. It had to be. As Grace and Eli left the hospital that day, Michael walked them to the car. Eli looked up and said, "When I get better, I'm going to make people better too, just like you did." Michael crouched down to meet his eyes. Then the world's already in good hands. Grace watched them with quiet awe. The billionaire who had once been too busy for people was now kneeling in hospital mud for her little brother. And though she couldn't explain it, something inside her shifted, gratitude blooming into something gentler, something almost like affection. The following morning, sunlight poured softly through the hospital window blinds, brushing gold across Eli's small face. Grace had fallen asleep in the chair beside him, exhaustion finally claiming her. Michael sat near the foot of the bed, quiet and still, a book open in his lap but unread. When Eli stirred, Michael looked up. "Morning, champ," he said with a faint smile. Eli blinked slowly. You stayed again. Michael nodded. Couldn't let your sister fight this alone. The boy's lips curved into a sleepy grin. You're nice for a rich guy. Michael chuckled, warmth flickering in his eyes. That's the first time anyone's called me that. Grace woke a few minutes later, rubbing her eyes. You didn't go home. Michael shrugged. Didn't feel right to. She smiled softly, her hair messy, her face pale but peaceful. You're impossible, you know that. Maybe, he said, but at least I'm consistent. They both laughed quietly, the tension of the past few days easing like a long-held breath finally released. Later, as doctors ran tests and nurses fluttered around, Michael stood by the window, staring out at the city below. The world outside kept spinning. Meetings, traffic, headlines. But in this small room, time stood still. Grace came up beside him. You look like you're a million miles away. Just thinking, he murmured. About what? He hesitated before speaking. About how many times I walked past someone like you. How many people I could have helped but didn't. She looked at him with gentle eyes. Then help now. That's what matters. Be honest. Could you forgive after what they did? Type forgive if you could, or never if it would break you too deeply. Michael turned his gaze toward her, studying the strength in her face. You've forgiven this world, haven't you? Even after everything it took from you. Grace smiled faintly. I had to. Holding on to hate is like holding your breath and expecting someone else to suffocate. Her words hit him like truth he'd been avoiding for years. He looked away, swallowing hard. Hours passed, and when Eli was finally discharged, Michael insisted on driving them home. Grace protested at first, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. As they reached the apartment, Grace stood outside the cracked doorway, embarrassed. It's not much. Michael shook his head. It's home. That's more than most people have. Eli ran inside, greeting that tiny cat and plopping onto the worn-out couch. Grace leaned against the doorframe, exhausted but glowing. Michael stepped inside, scanning the small space. A leaking pipe in the corner, faded wallpaper, second-hand furniture, yet it felt warmer than his entire mansion. Grace noticed his distant look. You can sit down, you know. He smiled softly. I'm fine. She crossed her arms. You look like a man who hasn't sat still in years. Maybe I'm afraid I like it too much. She laughed quietly, walking over to pour him some tea. Then you definitely need to. He took the cup, their fingers brushing briefly. A strange current passed between them, not romantic, but deeply human. As he sipped, his eyes drifted to a framed photo on the wall. Grace, Eli, and a woman with the same smile. Your mother. Grace nodded. She passed 2 years ago. Heart condition. He lowered his head slightly. I'm sorry. She used to say, Grace continued softly, when life turns its back on you, don't curse it. Tap its shoulder and remind it you're still here. Michael smiled faintly. Sounds like she was a fighter. She was everything I want to be. They sat in quiet reflection. The ticking of a cheap wall clock filled the silence. Then, out of nowhere, Michael spoke again. You know, when I lost my sister, I blamed myself. 4 years. I thought making money would make up for it, but it just built a bigger wall around me. Grace looked at him gently. Maybe tonight you started tearing it down. He glanced at her, eyes wet but steady. Maybe you're right. The evening light faded, and Grace prepared dinner. Nothing fancy, just rice and soup. She made him sit, refusing his protests. As they ate, Eli leaned forward, animated. Mr. Grant, do you have kids? Michael smiled sadly. No, Eli, I never married. Why not? He paused. Because I thought love was something that slowed people down. Grace's spoon stopped midair. And now, he met her eyes. Now I think it's the only thing that keeps us alive. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air between them was heavy, not awkward, but sacred, filled with everything they didn't need to say aloud. Outside, rain began to fall again, soft and rhythmic. Grace stood and opened the small window, letting the cool breeze in. "I used to hate the rain," she said. "But now, it just feels like the world washing itself clean." Michael looked out too, his heart oddly still. Maybe that's what we're all trying to do, wash off everything we couldn't fix. She turned to him, smiling. "Then you're doing better than most." And for the first time in years, Michael didn't argue. He just sat there, quiet, content, and human. The next morning broke with pale sunlight creeping through the apartment window. Eli was still asleep on the couch, his small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Grace stood by the window with a cup of tea in her hands, her gaze lost somewhere between gratitude and disbelief. Michael was sitting at the table, scrolling through his phone silently, his tie loosened, hair slightly out of place, a sight no one at his office would ever recognize. "You're still here," Grace said quietly. He looked up, offering a faint smile. "I figured I'd help you get Eli to his appointment later. I already told my assistant to clear my schedule." Grace tilted her head. "You cleared a billionaire's schedule for a hospital visit." He chuckled. "Don't make it sound too dramatic." "Michael," she said softly, setting her cup down, "you've done more for us than I can ever repay." "You already have," he replied, his tone gentle. "You reminded me what it means to live for something real." Her lips trembled, but before she could speak, Eli's sleepy voice broke the moment. "Are we having pancakes?" Grace turned, smiling. "We don't have flour, buddy." Michael stood up. "We will in 10 minutes. An hour later, laughter filled the kitchen as Michael flipped pancakes like an amateur chef while Grace teased him mercilessly. It was imperfect, chaotic, and utterly human, and he loved every second of it. When breakfast was done, Eli hugged him. "You're like family now." Michael froze for a moment, then knelt to meet his eyes. "That means more than you know, kid." They drove to the hospital later that morning. Grace sat in the front seat, her hand resting on Eli's backpack. For once, she looked relaxed. "It's strange," she said, staring out the window, "how life can change just because one person decided to stop walking away." Michael's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Maybe we were both walking in the wrong direction until that night." "If that's true," she said softly, "then I'm glad the world made our paths cross." He didn't reply. He couldn't. The truth in her words hit deeper than she knew. If you believe love still wins, comment Amen. Let's fill this section with hope. Maybe someone scrolling right now needs to see it. At the hospital, Eli went in for his checkup, leaving Grace and Michael waiting in the hallway. "You know," Grace said, turning toward him, "I think I understand now why you keep showing up." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" She nodded slowly. "Because you're not trying to save us. You're trying to forgive yourself." He blinked, stunned by her quiet precision. "You're sharper than you look." She smiled. "Pain teaches you to see clearly." He exhaled. "You're right, Grace. I spent years building walls made of money, pretending they protect me. But all they did was keep me from feeling anything real." Grace placed a gentle hand over his. "Then maybe it's time to stop pretending." The weight of her words lingered as Eli came running out, waving a note from the doctor. "They said I'm getting better." Grace lifted him into her arms, laughing through tears. Michael smiled, his heart swelling in quiet pride. Outside the hospital, the world seemed brighter, cleaner, somehow. The kind of day that reminded you life could still surprise you. Michael stood beside his car, watching Grace and Eli talk. For a brief, fragile moment, he imagined what it might be like to stay, to be part of something incalculated, something real. But as the thought settled, his phone rang. His assistant's voice cut through the moment. A deal on the line, investors waiting, headlines at risk. "Understood," he said after a pause. "I'll be there." Grace noticed a change in his expression. "Work." He nodded reluctantly. "Something I can't ignore." She smiled softly. "It's okay. You've done enough." But the way she said it, calm, accepting, final, made his chest ache. "I'll be back," he promised. "I know," she replied, though her eyes said maybe not. As he drove away, the city stretched before him, glass towers and cold ambition, the world he'd built colliding with the one he'd almost chosen. He thought about Grace's words, about forgiveness, about love that asked for nothing. And somewhere between the traffic lights and the skyline, he realized something terrifying. He didn't want to go back to the man he was before. That night, Michael sat in his penthouse, the skyline sprawling beneath him like a city made of stars. Yet for all its brilliance, it felt empty. The silence was deafening. No soft laughter, no clatter of dishes, no little boy's voice asking innocent questions about life. Just the ticking of a luxury clock in a room that had never really been a home. He loosened his tie, staring at his reflection in the glass. The man who looked back wasn't the same one who had stepped out of that limousine weeks ago. This one had seen the power of a trembling voice, the weight of kindness, and the way love could heal the wounds money never could. He picked up his phone. Grace's name glowed on the screen. His thumb hovered over it for a moment before he finally pressed call. She answered on the second ring, her voice soft and surprised. "Michael?" "Yeah," he said, his tone quiet. "I just wanted to check on Eli." "Is asleep," she replied. "He asked about you before bed, though, said you're his hero." Michael's chest tightened. His mind, too. There was a pause, the kind of silence that says more than words. "We miss you here," she said finally. He exhaled slowly, the sound trembling with meaning. "I miss you too." "Then come by tomorrow," she said gently. "You don't need a reason." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I do." "Then let this be your reason," she whispered. "Family isn't who you're born to, Michael. It's who stays when everything else falls apart." Her words hit deep, simple, soft, and exactly what his soul had needed to hear. If this story moved you, don't scroll past quietly. Tap like, not for me, but for the soul who carried this pain and still stayed kind. One click can be your way of saying, "I felt you." The next morning, sunlight filled Grace's apartment as Eli bounced on the couch, excitement lighting up his face. "He's really coming." Grace smiled, nodding. He said he would. Moments later, a knock sounded on the door. Eli sprinted to open it, and there he was, Michael Grant, holding a grocery bag in one hand and a small stuffed bear in the other. "Brought reinforcements," he said, his voice carrying warmth instead of wealth. Eli laughed and threw his arms around him. Grace stood in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. The billionaire who once lived behind walls of marble now kneeling on her worn-out rug, laughing with a child like he'd never known pain. "Welcome back," she said softly. Michael looked up at her, eyes gentle. "Feels good to be home." They spent the morning cooking, laughing, and making a mess of pancakes. Grace teased him for burning the first batch. Eli tried to flip one midair and nearly dropped it, and for the first time in a long time, Michael's laughter didn't sound forced. It was real. As the day faded, Grace stood by the window, the city lights glowing beyond. "You ever think about how strange it is?" she asked. "One night, one moment, and everything changes." Michael came beside her, looking out too. "I think about it every day." She turned to him. "Do you regret it?" He shook his head slowly. "No, it's the best thing that's ever happened to me." Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of something purer. "Then maybe your sister would be proud." Michael's throat tightened. "I hope so, because helping you, it helped me forgive myself." Grace nodded. "Then you finally did it. You stopped running." He smiled faintly. "No, Grace, you stopped me." They stood there, two souls from different worlds, bound by pain and reborn through kindness. The rain began to fall again, tapping softly against the window, not as sorrow this time, but as grace itself. Eli's laughter filled the room behind them, his small voice calling out, "Come on, it's movie time." Grace and Michael shared a look that needed no words. They joined him, sitting on the couch, a broken billionaire, a poor girl, and a boy who had once stopped breathing, now breathing life back into each other. As the movie flickered on the screen, Michael looked around the tiny room, peeling wallpaper, dim light, and the kind of warmth that money could never buy. He realized that this was what he had been searching for all along. And as the credits rolled, he whispered quietly to himself, "Sometimes the richest people are the ones who have the least." Grace heard him and smiled, her eyes glistening in the soft glow of the TV. And the poorest hearts, she said, can still teach the world how to love. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware of the miracle happening in that small apartment, a miracle born not of wealth, but of humanity. And for the first time in his life, Michael Grant didn't just feel successful. He felt whole.